So let's start here with the third reading. We're looking at part two today, but I do want to go back to part one because it was kind of a little bit of a cliffhanger, uh, story-wise and grammatically. So hopefully you've already watched yesterday's video. We're talking about these two guys, Marius and Sulla, for a more in-depth explanation of who they were. Again, go back to yesterday's video. But suffice it to say, they were former consuls, co-consuls, allies. They had a big old falling out, and we're going to see that it doesn't end well for Marius, unfortunately. But going back to this line from part one, we learned Gaius Marius, consul 6 times, gave a reason to civil war, a reason for there to be a civil war. So again, Eutropius is making the claim that Marius started it. What is that reason? Nam. He gave that reason because cum here, when Sulla, the consul, participial phrase, what we talked about today, who was about to wage war against Mithridates, who had seized Asia and Achaia, so eastern parts of what would butt up against the Roman Empire. Miterator, we're talking about Sulla. When Sulla was sent, about to wage war, and he is teneret, he held his army in Campania, Paulisper, for a short time in order to get rid of Tolerentor, in order to wipe out the reliquiae belli socialis, the remainders, the remaining bits of the social war, de quo diximus, about which diximus, and I didn't mention this yesterday, but he does use the plural, right? He says about which we have spoken, and authors will frequently do that. It's like the royal we kind of thing, but it's really bringing you into the conversation. Remember we talked about that? Remember the social war, which we talked about earlier? That's the idea. The social war, which had been waged intra Italiam, within Italy. So the social war, it's called the social war not for what we think of social, but all of the different tribes that were allies of Rome, they still consider themselves to be partially independent from Rome, but they were referred to as the Socii. The Socii, Latin, those are the allies. So the social war was a war that kind of started as a war among those different tribes, and then Rome kind of steps in and wipes them out. Essentially, those tribes were getting a little too uppity for Rome, and Rome just went in there and showed them who's boss. And that brings us to the conclusion of that sentence, which is the fact that when Sulla was sent to go deal with Mithridates, and he had to make a pit stop in Italy to deal with the social war, while all of that was going on, we get the other element. We get Marius adfectavit, which is a very it's a weird verb. It's not something that you probably say too often in English. I mean, the literal translation would be affected, not effected, but affected. And what that really means is to give the impression. To put on a certain affect means to put on a certain air about you. So what this means is that Marius affectavit, Marius gave the impression, and this is going to trigger an ut clause. He gave the impression that ipse ad bellum Mithridaticum miterator, another verb, another time that we've seen this verb, that's your imperfect passive. So Marius gave the impression that ipse, that he himself was being sent to the war with Mithridates. Okay. So the idea here is while Sulla was actually sent to go deal with Mithridates, Marius gave everyone the impression, he kind of pretended almost, that he was taking an army to go and deal with Mithridates, which was not what he was doing according to this author. So you always have to remember that bit. So Marius gave the impression that he himself was being sent to the Mithridatic War, to the war with Mithridates. Quare, which is ablative, Sulla, comotus. So Sulla is described as comotus. That's another participle. Cum exercitu ad urbem venit. Right? So this is about as, in terms of sentence structure, this is about as simple as it gets, right? If you ignore the participle, it basically says Sulla venit, came, ad urbem, to the city, with his army. Right? That's a pretty simple sentence. This participle describing him, komotus means stirred up, right? Komoeo means to stir something up. So if he's Sulla komotus, he's Sulla the stirred up one. So we could just say the angered Sulla, like we said we could do it the adjective way, or we could say Sulla after he was riled up, after he was, made angry. Quare, ablative, by this thing. So we would probably say in English, angered by this, Sulla came to the city with his army. So sometimes you can take that participial phrase and you can just put it at the beginning. Remember, we can also go into our bag of tricks, right? When, since, after, because. I think there's a connection between Sulla being angry and showing up to the city with his army. So you could say, since he was angered by this, since he was stirred up by this, since he was incensed by this, Sulla came to the city with his army. So the connection there is not just, hey, he happens to be a person who's angered, right? We're telling you he's angered because we're explaining to you why he went to the city with an army. And going to the city with an army is a very, very, very big deal. Okay? The city limits, so to speak. I mean, Rome is a city. It's a contained unit. But the idea of Rome is a little bit bigger than just the 7 hills, right? It's the surrounding areas. It's actually quite a big piece of territory that they consider to be Rome. And there was a boundary, a little stream that kind of marked the end of what was considered Rome. And once you were within that territory, once you crossed that boundary, you were not supposed to have weapons. So if you're in the army, right, if you're a soldier on campaign, let's say, you can't come back to the city in your gear. You cannot come back in your military uniform. You cannot come back to the city holding your weapons. That was seen as an act of war. The only people who would cross into Rome with weapons would be enemies. And that boundary was this little river, barely a river, kind of just a stream called the Rubicon. So if you crossed the Rubicon, you were entering into the city of Rome. And if you crossed the Rubicon with weapons, that meant that you were attacking the city. Essentially, you were marching on Rome. So we're going to see that, unfortunately, that's going to happen, right? Illic, which is a little adverb here, there. Hic is here, so illic is there. There, contra Marium et sulpicium, big old accusative prep phrase there, dimicavit. And when I said in the last sentence, they don't get much easier than this, I mean, they really don't get much easier than this one, right? So, Sulla came to the city, and there he dimicoed, he struggled, fought. He fought contra, against Marius and an ally of Marius, Sulpicius. And again, we're not going to get too deep in the woods or far in the woods. What's the expression? We're not going to get too into the weeds. That's what I'm looking at. It's not woods, it's weeds. Let's not get into the weeds on all of these historical figures. Marius and Sulla are the two that we really want to know. Okay? So he fought against Marius and Sulla. Primus, right? We should all know what primus means. It is in the nominative case. Urbem is in the accusative. Romam, of course, in the accusative as well. The Urbem Romam, the city of Rome. And notice how I did that, right? You can say in English the city of Rome. It's just that in Latin they would say the city Rome. Right? We put the of in there in English, but that doesn't mean that you would have a genitive in that situation. Okay? Armatus is nominative. It is a participle. They just seem to be coming up a lot. And then we have our verb ingressus est. Ingredior is a deponent verb. So third singular perfect. And we got a nice comma, so we can kind of pause there for a second. Primus armatus ingressus est urbem Romam. So we got to think who's the subject, because the nominative words here are first and armed. Who is this first armed masculine singular person that we're talking about? We're talking about Sulla. So Sulla primus. It's not that Sulla first entered Rome. When you have primus like this, it means he was the first. As in, of all time, he was the first person to ingressus, to enter the city of Rome. So I'm going to put he, and I'm going to put Sulla, just make sure we know who we're talking about, was the first armatus. We can say he was the first armed person to enter Rome, or we could say he was the first person to enter Rome, enter the city of Rome, armed. In English, you can kind of go either way. He was the first armed person to enter the city of Rome, or he was the first person to enter the city of Rome armed. Either way. Sulpicium interfecit. Okay, don't lose the basics, right? Accusatives are accusatives, right? My verb's my verb. So don't say Sulpicius killed, right? He killed Sulpicius. And third singular perfect. He killed Sulpicius. And fugo is different than fugio. Fugio means to run away. Fugo, fugare, its first conjugation. Fugo, fugare means to make someone else run away. Is there a good word for this in English? Not really. You're essentially sending them running. It's like sending somebody packing, essentially. So fugio is I run away. Fugo is I make you run away, if that makes sense. So he killed Sulpicius and sent Marius running. That's one way you can think of it. So key takeaways from this line: primus and armatus, right, describing Sulla. So he was the first armed man, or he was the first man armed to enter the city of Rome. He killed Sulpicius. He sent Marius packing. Atque, and, so we have our conjunction. Atque ita is kind of like itaque. They kind of mean the same thing. And ita is one of these little words that we're going to see all the time in Latin. It's best to just ignore it and maybe go back and add a little something, but it's never one of those words that's like going to make or break your translation. Okay? It has so many different little meanings. It can be now, it can be after, it can be already, it can be so many different things. So don't let it mess you up. But it is an adverb. Ordinatis consulibus in futurum annum Naio Octavio et Lucio Cornelio Cinna. When you see this situation, consulibus, and then a couple of names in the ablative, this is a very classic ablative absolute. And this is how they would tell you what year it was. Okay, when this guy and this guy were consuls. In futurum annum Naio Octavio et Lucio Cornelio Cinna ad Asiam. So we have an accusative here, ad Asiam. Profectus s from proficiscor, so another deponent verb. Third singular perfect tense. So atque ita, and so. Now, a little bit of specialized vocabulary that we need here. Consuls, right? The consuls were like the co-leaders, the co-presidents. The verb ordinare means to literally put in order, but in the context of consuls, in context of the government, it almost means to select or to choose. So with Gnaeus Octavius and Lucius Cornelius Cinna, with Octavius and Cinna sort of selected as the consuls, with them the chosen consuls in futurum annum, into the future year, aka into the next year. So after Octavius and Cinna were appointed, I guess you could say for ordinare, were appointed consuls for the next year, for the futurum annum. After that was done, he, Sulla, proficiscor is to set out, to depart, and you always depart ad somewhere, either ab somewhere or ad somewhere. He set out for Asia. Set out for a place, set out to a place. He set out to Asia. He set out for Asia. He set out to Asia. He left to go to Asia. And remember, we're talking about Asia Minor, right? He's not going to China. He's going to Turkey. Okay. All right, so a lot to unpack in this story, of course, a lot more historical context that we need, but hopefully it was a little bit of good practice and review with translation. So ablative absolutes, right? We got a few of those. We definitely got some participial phrases, right? We had automatus, he's the first armed man. We had comotus, right? Stirred up by this. And a pretty short section as well. Okay, and a couple new words for us. All right, I think this is a short one today, but it was a pretty short. Julius Caesar. It's always the answer, my dude. Always. All right, I'll cut it here. I'll give you guys a short one for this week. All right, see you tomorrow. Oh, wait. No. Unless you're watching this on Thursday. If you're watching this on Wednesday, see you Friday. If you're watching this on Thursday, I'll see you tomorrow. And if you're watching this on Friday, what are you doing?